So I like to tell people that I was raised on fair trade coffee and love in the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Corvallis, Oregon. That's how we did things there. I started drinking coffee much too young, despite my parents' best efforts, and I could recite the golden rule from each of the world's religions in the same breath as the 7 principles. But the principles were really the only thing I knew about Unitarian Universalism. The inherent worth and dignity of every person, the democratic process, respect for the world, and of course, we lit a chalice every time we gathered. But other than that, my Sunday mornings were full of learning about other religious traditions. Celebrating the Lunar New Year, or making flower crowns for May Day. And it wasn't until middle school, when I went through my congregation's coming of age program, that I really began to understand what Unitarian Universalism was and what it meant to me. And it was in the 8th grade that I claimed Unitarian Universalism for myself. And it was just after 10th grade that I decided that I wanted to become a UU minister. And along the way, I began to realize one of the most important things about this faith, that we are a faith in motion, that we are alive, that we are still becoming. As conversations around adding an 8th principle around our anti-racism work, or even rewriting Article 2 entirely emerged, I realized that when we say we are a covenantal, not creedal faith, we mean it. We gather together and choose to be in relationship with each other based on the agreements we've made with one another. Not rules that have been passed down for generations, but promises. Agreements that we enter into voluntarily, and importantly, can and should change if they no longer serve us. So you might imagine my surprise when in 2022, a candidate running for the UUA Board of Trustees released a statement saying that and this is really heavy air quotes, younger and or marginalized identifying members were attempting to take Unitarian Universalism in a different direction than she wanted. She offered a solution for those of us who were younger and or marginalized identifying to split off and form another branch of Unitarian Universalism. And she even suggested a name, 21st Century UUs. Now, as a younger and marginalized identifying person raised in Unitarian Universalism, I want to be very clear. I reject the premise that I am not welcome in this faith. I'm not interested in forming another branch of Unitarian Universalism. I'm dedicated to helping Unitarian Universalism be the faith that I've always expected it to be. I believe that we have the potential for a rich, deep theology that brings with it the heretical challenges of our forebears, the curiosity and reason of Unitarians, the welcome and love of Universalists, and the innovation and promise of what we can learn and do together as Unitarian Universalists. And I think that you all do too. After all, our mission as the Community Church of New York is to grow as a caring, justice-making, anti-racist, diverse, spiritual community. That's why we gather. That's why we are here. And guess what? It's 2025. We're a quarter of the way into the 21st century. I'd imagine that we are all 21st century UUs. And speaking of marginalized communities, there's something that we do a lot of the time with the words that have been used against us. We reclaim them. The word queer, for example, was and still is used as a slur, as a way to other LGBT+ individuals and groups. And for many, that word still carries pain with it today. But for others, it's a reclamation that is powerful. I proudly claim the identity of queer as my own, even though the people who first used the term created it to put people like me down. Another one of my favorite examples of reclamation comes from the TikTok famous UU minister, the Reverend Joanna Fontaine Crawford. Reverend Jo is representing us very well on the internet right now, calmly and clearly explaining what we stand for, all while ministering to a congregation and the larger community of the greater Austin, Texas area. And as you might imagine, Reverend Jo gets all sorts of insults on TikTok. People telling her that she's going to hell, that she's not a real minister, that she's a filthy heretic, and more. And instead of getting defensive or upset, she takes the best insults to her husband, who, drumroll please, turns them into cocktails. Yes, cocktails. Now imagine that, turning negativity into something creative, something to be savored, something that invites community and laughter. And in case you're wondering, in particular, the Filthy Heretic cocktail calls for tart cherry juice, simple syrup, fresh lemon juice, Chambord, and vodka. And she recommends making it a double if you're a Unitarian Universalist, since we have double the heresies. And I think that is just all a perfect metaphor for what our faith can be. Life hands us bitterness and spice, maybe some tart cherry juice, but we get to mix it up. Shake it, create something new, something that nourishes us, that connects us, that reminds us to enjoy the moment. And that's the kind of theology I want to embrace. One that invites play, invites joy, even in the face of challenge or critique. And that actually even happened with the word Unitarian, too. It was originally meant as an insult for Christians who rejected the divinity of Jesus, rejecting the Trinity and therefore being Unitarian. But we took the term and proudly made it our own, claiming our Unitarianism. And so I'd like to imagine that we've done that with 21st century UUs too. After all, we are living in the 21st century, so I think we should claim it proudly. And not as a new branch of Unitarian Universalism, but in recognition and continuation of the Unitarian Universalism we've always been and will continue to be. Growing, changing joyfully in relationship with one another, caring for each other, liberating ourselves and those around us, all in the name of love. It's an all ages, all stages, all identities welcome kind of thing, because that's what we're about at Community Church. In our wisdom story today, I told the story of Rip Van Winkle, a man so focused on avoiding his tasks that he drinks something that makes him sleep for 20 years. But when Martin Luther King Jr. used to retell that story, he drew out another point. He said that there's another point in that story that is almost always completely overlooked. It was a sign on the inn in the little town on the Hudson from which Rip went up into the mountain for his long sleep. When he went up, the sign had a picture of King George III of England. When he came down, years later, the sign had a picture of George Washington, the first president of the United States. When Rip looked up at the picture of Washington, he was completely lost. He knew not who he was. This reveals to us the most striking fact about the story of Rip Van Winkle is not that he slept 20 years, but that he slept through a revolution. While he was peacefully snoring up on a mountain, a great revolution was taking place in the world. Indeed, a revolution which would, at points, change the course of history. And Rip Van Winkle knew nothing about it. He was asleep. Dr. King called on us to remain awake through the great revolutions of our time, whether that was the civil rights movement or the struggle against the fascist state we find ourselves in today. And staying awake doesn't just mean reacting to headlines or showing up at protests, though we do that too. It means staying alert to the deeper changes happening in our world and in ourselves. It means resisting the temptation to cling to the past. It means recognizing that revelation is ongoing, that truth continues to be revealed. And this isn't actually even new for us. Back in 1975, just 15-ish years after the Unitarian and Universalist denominations merged, the Commission on Appraisal reported that some of us already felt lost without a clear theological center. They wrote in 1975, "Some of us have the feeling that if we could only achieve a consensus on our core beliefs, this would help pull us together." They lamented that our failure to define ourselves might be the root cause of our struggles. And maybe they were right. Ask any Unitarian Universalist to define our faith, and you'll likely hear a pause, a chuckle, and then something like, "Well, it's complicated." And we often fall back on our principles or our values. We talk about love at the center. But the truth is that Unitarian Universalism has never just been about a set of affirmations or ideas. It's about the search, the never-ending, awe-filled, sometimes overwhelming search for what matters most. The theologian Paul Tillich called revelation the manifestation of what concerns us ultimately. And for us, I would say what concerns us ultimately is the journey itself. It's the asking, not necessarily the answering. And that's what keeps our tradition alive. Not certainty, but curiosity. Not creeds, but commitments. Not purity, but presence. Because let's be honest, the world is overwhelming. Sometimes it feels too vast, too complex, too painful to make sense of. When I was in college, I took an introductory astronomy class just to fulfill a graduation requirement. And it was very different from the classes that I take now that I'm in seminary, but it also was very similar in a lot of ways. And I have to say, I think I had more existential crises in that astronomy class than I've ever had in any sort of religion class. Because we'd study the beginnings of the universe, learning about stars and galaxies that were so large, I couldn't even really understand their size. Realizing that the tiny little pinpoints of light we see in the sky were so far away, I couldn't even comprehend that to reach them would take not only my lifetime, but the lifetime of our entire human species. Our lives are so short compared to the stars. The author, scientist, and scholar of traditional ecological knowledge, Robin Wall-Kimmerer, writes that time as objective reality has never made much sense to me. It's what happens that matters. How can minutes and years, devices of our own creation, mean the same things to gnats and to cedars? 200 years is young for the trees. It's an eye blink of time for the river and nothing at all for the rocks. The rocks and the river and these very same trees are likely to be here in another 200 years if we take good care. And as for me and that chipmunk and the cloud of gnats milling in a shaft of sunlight, we will have moved on. We will have moved on. But even in the face of that unknowing, I felt something holy. Not because I've ever found an answer, but because I'm a part of something so much bigger than myself. And I think that's the heart of our faith. We certainly don't have all the answers, but we have each other, and we have a shared promise to keep seeking them together. And that's what makes 21st century Unitarian Universalism so powerful. Not that it's new, but that it's alive. Not that it's settled, but that it's still growing, and we are growing with it. We didn't sleep through the revolution. We are still waking up into it together. So what does Unitarian Universalism look like in today's changing world? Well, at least here at Community Church, it looks like this. It looks like people of all ages and identities showing up week after week to ask big questions together. It looks like making art for protest signs, and showing up singing at Pride. It looks like sorting mail for incarcerated Unitarian Universalists. It looks like meeting up for ice cream or hot pot or a meal after the service. It looks like joy in the face of despair and hope when the headlines try to crush us. Here at Community Church, we are finding new ways to be together, to grow, to practice what we preach. And sometimes that means disrupting, not discarding the past, but loosening our grip on the way things have always been, so that we can stretch towards what could be. It's not perfect, it's not finished, but it's real. Our tradition has never been static. Our ancestors questioned, protested, reimagined, and remade the church in their time. And together we are doing the same, rooted in courage and carried forward by the energy and insight of the present. So what does it mean to be a 21st century UU? To be the church of the open mind, the loving heart, the helping hands. To trust that new truths are still unfolding. To believe that we belong to each other and act like it. Because we are not a faith that sleeps through the revolution. We are a faith that wakes up again and again to the call of love. And together, we answer it. May it be so.
Be open for something.